And you are live.
Welcome to the February 16th Planning Commission meeting of the City of Annapolis. Kimberly, could we have the roll call, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Pline,
Present?
Mr. Waldman,
Present.
Ms. Pico,
Present.
Ms. Butler,
Present.
myself, Mr. Sale, Mr. Imes. We know we're not expecting Mr. Svakunudis. Mr. Chairman, we currently have 4 members present.
Great. So we have our quorum, so we can get on with our the rest of our agenda, which I will go ahead and share. Thank you, Kimberly. So our agenda tonight has really one main thing on it, but our first order of business tonight is approval of minutes from February 2nd. I trust everybody's had a chance to look at those. We had the, just to refresh everybody's memory, we had just a presentation by the city doc team on the revised changes that for the city doc plan. That was the main thing on the agenda, and Kimberly captured that the discussion well for us. So I'd entertain a motion to accept those as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions or nays? Great. Thank you very much. Okay, so the one piece of business, new business on our agenda tonight is an update on the comprehensive plan by Eric Lashinsky, Chief of Comprehensive Planning. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Eric to give us a presentation. And if you're okay, Eric, we can give him just 4 of us. If you're okay with stopping for questions, or if you want to get through a certain point and hold the questions, just let us know.
We can take questions, I think, as we go, since we're just a few people here. And if it gets out of hand, I'll try to get us back into the presentation. But yeah, I don't mind keeping it informal. So before I bring the presentation up, I just want to acknowledge some staff that are here. I appreciate our current planning staff, Chief Current Planning Tom Smith, and Jackie Rouse, Senior Planner, our Plan Director Michael Laplace. I want to introduce Casey Ortiz, who is a comprehensive planner here that started in September and replaced Eric Borchers, who left last June. So Casey has been a great addition to the team, and he spent some time in Easton previously working there, so he kind of cut his teeth in kind of a similar context to Annapolis, and was most recently working for a private consulting firm on the electric vehicle charging station rollout for the state of Maryland. So pretty exciting stuff. And a man who needs no introduction, Chris Jakubiak. Actually, he does need an introduction, I think, to some of the planning commissioners. But Chris is a consultant that worked on the comprehensive plan when we got going in 2020, and he has a long history here in Annapolis. He used to work; his office used to be based here. He lived here. He was on the Board of Appeals. Am I right about that, Chris?
Yes, yes, that's right. That's right.
Worked on our last comprehensive plan, and he was one of several consultants that were already here when I started in 2020. I really have appreciated his perspective, having some history here in Annapolis and kind of seeing how the city has evolved. So he's coming back to kind of help as we roll out the comprehensive plan, and just provide some perspective internally as we're sort of reviewing the document. And so I asked him to be here tonight. Without further ado, let me go ahead and share my screen. Let's see here. You able to see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm going to go ahead and. Are you seeing the full slide or the presenter view with the small? Are you seeing the one slide?
We're seeing the full slide now. We
Okay,
saw the presenter view a second ago, but we're seeing, I think, what you want us to see.
Yeah, great,
Yeah.
great. I was thinking of calling this presentation "Dude, Where's My Comp Plan?" But I tried to be more professional, and it's called Land Use Approach. And this is because I know it's on people's minds. I get questions weekly. What's the status of the comp plan from residents and who've been involved, and I'm going to talk a bit about the schedule in a moment. But land use is probably the foundational aspect of the comprehensive plan. And this is not the first time I've presented to the Planning Commission. I was going back through the past presentations. This is the 7th time I've come since 21. There have been many other presentations, public forums, public opportunities to see the progress. But to this body, 7 times we were last year in July of 21 with a brief update. Prior to that, in early July, we did a mobility approach presentation, which is also very important to the comprehensive plan. It's intimately connected to land use. But today, I was debating calling it development approach or land use approach. I see I didn't update this, but development or land use approach, that's really the focus for tonight. I think it's something that's been on people's minds with current legislation at City Council related to workforce housing and parking policy. And there's been a lot of interest in seeing what the comprehensive plan says about those issues. And so I want to sort of use tonight to talk about that, what the comprehensive plan can do, what it can't do, in sort of helping us guide land use policy and development. I want to take a moment just to kind of, as a refresher, to remind the commission and people watching at home that, here in Maryland, the Planning Commission actually has a pretty important role in terms of comprehensive plans. It's really tasked with doing the comprehensive. You sort of delegate that to staff, but it's your responsibility to sort of deliver a comprehensive plan to the elected official, to the City Council, something that you are happy with, that you support, that you think is a good document, and and it's something that has the consensus of the residents. So this is just something I wanted to remind you all of, that there's real value in me coming, not just because I like you, but coming to the Planning Commission and sharing updates and making sure that you're aware of what's in the plan and just keeping you abreast. It's very important for me to do that with City Council as well. But I think in some ways, you have to make sure that this is ready for them. And so thank you for making time on the agenda for this. I am trying to get back
Can I
to
ask you a quick question on this, just in terms of one of the things that you mentioned about, and it's, I'm just reading over here, just because you said something that's not written here, that about consensus with citizens or something like that.
Well, so what I meant to say is, the Planning Commission is seen as a representative body of the population, and that's, this is a primary forum for You'll see in the next slide, how we treat the comment period and public hearing on the comprehensive plan. It really works through the planning commission. So that's kind of what I was, what I was trying to say, if that makes more sense.
Yeah, I guess the only reason I bring that up is that, that there may be things in here that are a little counter to maybe what a large number of citizens may want
Mhm.
or not want. And so, I just want to make sure that, we obviously have to take input and weigh, things that citizens want and like versus things in our professional judgment along with yours might be good for the city, even though, it's so slightly counter to perhaps what any one group of constituents might want. I mean, those are things we have to balance. That's
Yeah.
why I just want to.
Yeah, that's a very good insight. I mean, because I think in thinking about the future of the city, we have to take into account considerations that may not necessarily be important to the typical homeowner in the city. Having a diverse, inclusive population, that people can afford to live in, a place where people can afford to live. I mean, those kind of issues may not be tantamount to, to the high priorities for everybody in the city. But yeah, that's just.
So many of the goals here may be, there may be a lot of tension between particular goals. I mean, as we've seen.
Yeah.
Okay. So sorry.
So you've seen some versions of this schedule before. We tried to update it to be a more clear. It's candidly, the schedule has gotten pushed many times. It's something that I've had to do because there's many other things going on right now. As you all know, we have tremendous momentum on several other active projects that probably should have happened, a couple decades ago. And there's finally funding for public water access plan, redevelopment initiative for our largest public housing community in Eastport, which is this Eastport Choice Neighborhood Transformation Plan. We are wrapping up a resilience study that was funded by the Department of Defense called the Military Installation Resilience Review Study, that really looks at what we can do to make sure that the Navy stays here in Annapolis, because its properties are in the most vulnerable locations within the city to sea level rise and storm surge. And so those things are happening in the background to the comprehensive plan. I've been very involved in all of them. I've also been advancing a lot of trail, multimodal transportation initiatives, the West East Express being the major one that we've been talking about for years. And finally, we have $4 million in federal funding for that. It's very exciting. We can advance that project, and it's been a long time coming. So, while I'm not happy to have had to push the comprehensive plan, we are getting very close, and I'm very excited about it. I'm going to give you some views of real page layouts from the document tonight, and we're fine in terms of the state's expectation in terms of schedule. They recognize that we got census data in 2021, which is pretty critical to the comprehensive plan. On the State Department of Planning website, I mean, they really acknowledge that having this by 2024 is realistic, and I don't think we'll need till then, but we might. This is the current schedule. You can see that if we have a draft comprehensive plan document by early May, we would want to schedule a return to the Planning Commission to share that and set a date for an eventual public hearing after a 60-day public comment period, which is a mandate from the state. And that's when the general public would have a way to comment on the plan. It would be available widely, digital format, in print if needed. We would set up a mechanism to allow for easy commenting and capture all those comments in a comment log. We would be doing some webinars to share what's in the comprehensive plan and kind of demystify it. We've actually been working on some promotional videos with the TV studio. Thank you to Mark and Julian and Madeline for helping on that. Those are short videos that'll kind of promote some of the key themes of the comprehensive plan, and we'll be able to share those at that time. After the end of the 60-day comment period, there would be a formal planning commission hearing, potentially 2 hearings or more, depending on the, what's needed. But that would then start the planning commission's review process. And, this is just an estimate of what we think might be needed in terms of time through the summer into September, knowing that people go away and such. And then the hope is that planning commission might have some, recommendations for revision, but, hopefully things that don't require wholesale removal of new content. It's more surgical. And but essentially, we are looking for a vote to approve the plan and recommend it to the city council at that point, and then that would start the city council adoption process, which is a little bit of a open question as to how long that could take, but it'll take as long as it's needed to get support, and that's what we'll work with. That's what we're looking at right now. I just want to remind folks that although I know the schedule has gotten pushed, in terms of content, we've had the core content in terms of goals and recommended actions and performance metrics pretty solidified since late 2021. They've been available on the city's website, on our Annapolis Head 2040 website. You can Google Annapolis Head 2040. It's the first thing that comes up. There's a link on the main page of the city's website at the bottom to the comprehensive plan. In terms of the goals and actions, metrics, there has not been substantial change. We've refined things here and there, but most of the work since then has been in writing, fleshing out narrative on existing conditions to kind of help set up what we know, what kind of drove the goals and actions. We've been refining our maps and finding other illustrative content to kind of make the plan accessible, readable, something somebody wants to actually look at. And that's really kind of been pretty time intensive. So just wanted to say, we're not, there's been a ton of public engagement leading up till now. We've reached out to boards and commissions, civic associations. There's been a lot of engagement that has kind of gotten us to where we are today. I was hoping not to have to share this slide, but I felt like it might be helpful again. I think that there's a lot of kind of hope in what the comprehensive plan is going to tell us about our land use regulations in the city, zoning changes. There's a lot. Land use is inherently very contentious topic, and there's no easy way to write legislation around land use. I want to acknowledge that the comprehensive plan is not going to write the legislation for us. Unfortunately, it is going to sort of function like this Cannibal Bay seasoning. It's something that will flavor our zoning code, but it's still writing the actual legislation to guide land use is still going to be something that will be challenging. It'll give us guidance for how to do it. Tell us what's important to preserve or expand, but it won't exactly write legislation. I feel like it's important to acknowledge, as people are hoping, that if we wait till the comp plan is done, a lot of challenging issues are going to resolve themselves with that. And I don't think that's really the case. So I want to just simply clarify that. And just, share again that what we have in the comprehensive plan is a structure that's oriented around these three major visions for the city: the thriving city, the functional city, the adaptive city. The various chapters are based on the elements that are required by the state. Almost all of what you see here is required by the state, with the exception of our arts and culture chapter, which is not a requirement, but it's something that we felt strongly needs to be in Annapolis's comprehensive plan, particularly now, given that there's a lot of interest in expanding our creative economy here in the city. And environmental sustainability is also a chapter that catches several topics that are required, such as sensitive areas, is something the state requires us to address. So pretty
Can I
straight.
ask
Yeah.
another question?
Yeah.
One of the things that comes up a lot in development reviews is this concept of projects being consistent with the comprehensive plan. And, we always hear a lot of criticism about that because, thinking about what you said of the comp plan being not really prescriptive, it's more, guidance.
Yeah.
How do we resolve that issue of being being consistent, but not in a way that's seen as, I've heard people say that that statement is something you drive a truck through, which it is a pretty broad statement. So I guess that's something, and I don't know if that needs to be handled in the code that requires that, or whether you can say something somewhere in the preamble about what consistency means, because I think people are often look to the comprehensive plan as the developer wants to do X, and I don't see where it says they can do X in the comprehensive plan. So that it's that sort of mismatch in expectations about what that consistency means. So that I think that's something you might spend some time talking about in the plan, so that there's some way to interpret what that means when it does come up in those contexts.
That's a great point. Okay, I'm noting that. That's an excellent thing to clarify in the first chapter of the comprehensive plan. This is a slide I shared in a past presentation to get people excited. I'm really going to focus on just these three pieces of it, which are they're interrelated. They're all kind of guided by how we think about land use in the city. Try to be as straightforward and simplistic. I guess maybe not the right word, but there is there's a connection here in how we kind of develop ultimately our policies that guide land use, and this is the way I like to think about it. We start with a growth strategy. I'm going to talk about what that looks like. Ultimately, I think it comes down to who gets to live here in the next 20 years. How inclusive and diverse do we want to be as a city? The future land use strategy tries to address the growth vision and sort of what's the best use of the land that we have to achieve that. And then the regulatory strategy, which is not just zoning, it's other things. It's our adequate public facilities ordinance. But zoning is the big one, I think. A development code is sometimes how people refer to it. So how do we manage the land through regulatory frameworks to achieve our future land use goals? Is what we have today going to do that? Yes, Commissioner Waldman.
In answering the first of those questions, which leads to the second and the third, what's the ideal income distribution in an ideal city?
That's a tough one. I mean,
Well, do you want more wealthy people so as to be able to satisfy the tax burdens?
yeah, I mean, I think there needs to be a balance, but interesting. I mean, I think it's a challenging question to answer because, yeah, I mean, there is obviously a lot of focus on revenue in the city to pay for what people want, services and amenities, but there's all these other costs. I think that one of the things that I've been really struck by is there's all these, there are a lot of environmental costs that aren't really being accounted for. It's like, and I hate to bring up the workforce housing issue again because it's such a hot topic, but we talk a lot about why is it important for people of lesser incomes to live in the city, or the so-called workforce population, and it's the costs of people driving more from farther away, costs on the city are hard to quantify, but there's certainly costs there. And so, do we want a city that's highly economically stratified? So we have just a ton of revenue from high-end properties, and then, it's not a place for anybody else to live in. I mean, there's so many other costs that need to be accounted for. I guess that's the part for me that's challenging. I mean, I think it's also comes down to the value of diversity and inclusion, and so many of the goals in the comprehensive plan around arts and culture rely on having a population that can contribute to that. So
Well, just to, I don't know, I guess I'm acting nettlesome or something, but
yeah,
I am, right. Nonetheless, I mean, we have the highest per capita ratio of public housing of any municipality in the state.
after Baltimore.
Huh?
After Baltimore.
After Baltimore. Okay. So, for instance, I mean, I'm asking, this is a query. Should one of the goals of the city be to increase, keep the same, or reduce that ratio of public housing to population?
Yeah, I mean, just on this one topic.
Talk about hot button issues.
Yeah. The focus is much more on so-called middle demographic, the middle income population.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's a legitimate goal to articulate.
Yeah. It's
the middle class that holds the most promise. When the middle holds, the kingdom holds.
Yeah.
And I think that if you make that sort of clear, then that can become a growth strategy.
Yeah. No, I'm gonna get into that actually.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would also add that given that much of our revenue is based on property tax, there's a little that comes from income, but it's by and large, based on property values. I think to a certain extent, that's something that, I mean, I would really like to see in here, not, I don't know if you're going to have any of this, but, where the revenue comes from with respect to different, we've talked about this a lot over the last couple of years, is where where the revenue comes from different kinds of development patterns. And, I would assert that whilst, while large single family lots, the conventional wisdom is they produce the most tax revenue. I think that's sort of counterintuitive, that's not always the case. And I think that would be really good to have. And I know, Eric Borchers did a fair amount of work on that. And hopefully you'll show that, because that does lend some credibility to, like answering this question that Bob asked of like, what's the ideal set of people? And I think to a certain, based on revenue considerations, that it's a little counterintuitive. I think it doesn't, the immediate answer isn't just we want rich people so we get the most money. I don't think that's always the case.
No, this is a great lead into what I'm about to share. And
Good.
I would say another challenge to doing this comprehensive plan is that we keep, understandably, we continue to do other more focused plans on specific topics. And there is actually, we're trying to get going it's called a land and infrastructure valuation study. And it's exactly what you're talking about. We actually selected a great consultant to do it. We're trying to make up just candidly a little bit of the cost for the plan, but
can you say who that is? Is that?
Yeah, it's Urban 3. They're very, allied with the Strong Towns movement, but that study would essentially provide us with what you're talking about. I mean, I put a note here. I mean, we can certainly address where our current revenues come from, but yeah, you're absolutely right that the development pattern has a lot of implication on costs, and some people don't realize, single family home communities, that's where we're losing most of our tree canopy. The cost of servicing those communities is much higher than in multifamily, and so it's complicated. But if I were to summarize our growth strategy in the comprehensive plan, it's less of this and more of this. I mean, just simplistically, this presentation is less about transportation, but the development pattern between this and this has dramatic impacts on our economy, quality of life, environmental sustainability, cultural preservation, and so we're trying to make a case for it. And it's not that it's not easy. I mean, just creating this type of streetscape on West Street took a long time, but we start our municipal growth chapter by sharing this image of a project on Annapolis Street in West Annapolis, which is really kind of a model for the kind of development we're looking at to have more of, something that complements its surroundings, its mixed use, meaning there's retail on the ground floor and apartments above. It's something that enhances its existing neighborhood context. And so we're trying to get to a place where we can have more of this type of project. And I want to just highlight this paragraph because I think there's a lot of questions about what growth is. I get questions constantly, and it comes up a lot in presentations. And this is our effort to really distill what we talk about, what we mean by growth in the context of this comprehensive plan. All cities have a vital interest in the type, character, and impact of growth, both within and outside their municipal boundaries. In the context of this plan, growth is interpreted in several ways: as new businesses which open in Annapolis or choose to locate here, as new residents who choose to move to the city or children who are born here, as new development or redevelopment of property, and as land that is annexed to expand the city limits. For example, a maritime business opens a new office in one of the city's maritime districts. Company hires 10 people who choose to move to the city to be closer to work, and they move into new housing recently built in an area of the city where they can walk to conveniences and amenities. Growth is represented through all of these decisions, The city's policies can dictate how it chooses to grow, which in turn holds tremendous consequence. It can dictate how diverse the city is demographically, how healthy the city is, how well the city's natural resources are managed, and how safe and easy it is to move around the city, among other outcomes. As already expressed in Chapter 1, this plan envisions an Annapolis where growth leads to a more thriving, functional, adaptive city, grounded in an appreciation for equity, health, and resilience. So this is probably one of the best sound bites for the comprehensive plan in terms of what we're trying to achieve here. And obviously there's some aspirational things here, but that maritime business may not be able to hire 10 people that can move to exactly where they'd like to live, but in today's Annapolis. But you know, I should have said earlier, you know, Casey, our comprehensive planner, out of the 15 candidates that we interviewed, he was the only one that lived in the Annapolis area. So that I thought was kind of telling. So that's another bonus. I use these charts a lot to illustrate where we are population-wise. Commissioner Waldman?
Who wrote that?
It was probably something that Chris Jakubiak started. I probably added to it. It went through a few drafts. I'm not really sure.
I think it's well written. I think the layout of it, in order to communicate better, when you define growth as blah, 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 semicolon, as blah, 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 semicolon, I think I'd break those out. Okay, just I want to make that's a very powerful and well written, and I want to make it communicative.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Okay, so just real quick, running through these charts on the upper left, this is probably the most important chart in my opinion. It shows the population that we're losing over the last decade. You can see the blue bars are Annapolis, the orange is the state of Maryland, and green is the county. The 25 to 34 age group, we're losing a significant amount of population. Well, the state and county are gaining that population. Everybody is losing 45 to 54. We're also losing the 18 to 24, but you know, it's college age kids. So that may have something to do with it, but we're also losing 55 to 64. And we're really gaining the 65 and older population. So I see consequences from this, or implications, let's say, you know, for how, you know, it addresses affordability in the city, who can afford to live here. This one on the upper right kind of similarly shows, you know, we're not really gaining family households. We have nominal growth in singles or non-family households, 4.4%. And then the bottom, sort of to kind of encapsulate what we're saying, you know, that the costs of living here are severe, and they're only getting more extreme. So our median sale price for a single family home is over 600,000. And then the median rent for a 3-bedroom is over 2,000. So it kind of shows you, you know, you have to be earning 140% of the area median income to afford a home, to buy a home here, assuming certain standard you know, down payment and so forth. You need to be earning 80% of the area median income to rent here. So that's a big reach for a lot of people. These charts were prepared by BAE Economics, one of the other consultants for the comprehensive plan, who did a demographics and market study for us.
Once again, I think that somehow the conclusion needs to be stated in.
Yeah, there is that.
Okay.
There is, yeah,
Okay.
in the actual plan document, there's a summary. But yeah, I agree. You know, in terms of economic themes, things that we see as important to prioritize in the next 20 years that also guide our growth strategy. Inclusive opportunities. We want to make sure that, you know, people have opportunities to invest in the city. regardless of where they come from, what their vision is. It's going to improve the city. We want them to have a chance to do it here. And this is just one example of a cigar shop on Main Street, opened up last year. Tourism, clearly, it's a big revenue source for the city. It's draws a lot of people here. It's evolving. We need to be mindful of that. I mean, I think there's a number of boutique lodging that are opening up in the downtown area. Whether you like them or not, there's a market for that, and we have to be thinking about what kind of resources do we want to provide to encourage tourism and balance it with our resident population's needs as well. So we're not relying on tourism to a degree that when the next, God forbid, pandemic hits, we're in a better place. But tourism is certainly not going to go away. And there's a number of developments happening around the city, in the city, that are going to draw people here for other reasons. Preservation of Carr's Beach, famous historic Black beach resort, was a big deal this year. There's growing interest in the Chesapeake Bay National Recreation Area, which is being reviewed in Congress right now. That's a National Park Service initiative. Will draw more people here. Ferry service is being talked about and studied, and we've got a big grant for a pilot project here. But cultural economy, we've been a cultural capital for hundreds of years. That's really been part of our identity. And I feel like what we have not appreciated is what's involved in actually having cultural producers live here and thrive here. And we have a lot of great programs that draw people here for arts and cultural activities. But, I think if you look at, we don't have great statistics on our artist community, but I would say it's probably shrunk in the last few decades. So we want to think about that, and it's a huge economic driver for the city. And then finally, the maritime industry has gone through a lot of change. But it's still a huge anchor here in Annapolis, and we have what a lot of places would really want to have, which is the infrastructure for the maritime industry. We're kind of like a one-stop shop still for a lot of different services and needs. We did a maritime task force to understand how to strengthen that. This past year, we updated our zoning code to address some of the new needs and interests. This is just an example of one business that relocated to Eastport this past year in 2021, which is what we want to see. So we're going to be working with our economic development staff here and helping to enhance and strengthen that in the coming years. We did a blue technology study as part of the comprehensive plan that really looked at how to position Annapolis as a center for kind of the evolving maritime technology sector, which is basically all kinds of environmental, navigational technology businesses, that many of which are already based in the DC area. There's Boston, San Diego are two other hubs for that kind of work. So we want to think about how to attract those types of companies. I'm not going to spend much time on this, but we're required by the state to have a growth area, which essentially says, well, this is where the city would expand in the next 20 years. We could. It's very, very few places. We're not going very far in terms of our city boundary. These are really just places that would facilitate better service if they were part of the city. A couple of them are kind of odd gaps in the fabric. This triangular one off first is the Annapolis Middle School. Every other school in the city, even though it's property is owned by Anne Arundel County Public Schools, is within the city. This is the one that is not actually within the city boundary. You can see these parcels along Route 2. And there's a couple in the Bay Ridge area that would kind of fill out the fabric.
Is the issue with Annapolis Middle sort of a difference without a distinction? Because it doesn't, I mean, they're, even if it's part of the city, they're not going to pay any taxes.
No, it wouldn't have a lot of impact. I mean, I think that I'm sure the school system wants to have retained some control over what happens there, but it kind of drives our GIS staff nuts when we do the redistricting every 10 years, because it's sort of like a break in there's a awkwardness to where the city connects right there. That makes it challenging. But yeah, its impact is minimal.
Are there on those other areas, especially on the western side, is there any interest of those landowners to come into the city, or is that just sort of aspirational on our part?
Not really sure at this point. I mean, I think we have to sort of express an interest, I think, and then that can kind of, help to start the conversation. But and the county has to be involved as well. So, but it's really important for us to be just simply proactive about the areas that would make sense as part. This image here is of what's known as the West 2 shopping center at the intersection of Old Solomon's and West Street, and Route 2 is right here. Cannabis dispensary is in the middle of the parking lot. I mean, the city-county line goes right through that property. I don't know the history, doesn't make much sense. It would make a whole lot more sense for that whole parcel to be within the city. But we have a lot of goals and recommended actions about what we would want to see if these properties are annexed into the city. It's not necessarily, it's not an easy process, and it behooves us to have expectations for how they could benefit the city if they were part of the city. I'm not going to go too deep into the projections of household growth, but this is also something that we're required to understand to the best of our abilities what's a reasonable projection for our population growth in the next 20 years, based on trends and what we know is in the development pipeline, and what we would like to see ultimately. But we have 4 scenarios here. If you look, actually, first I would just say, if you look at the chart on the left side, it's hard to see, but between 2010 and 2020, we went from about 38,375 to about 40,912, 6.4% change, pretty modest increase. And that's kind of par for the course for Annapolis. The county grew more, 9.4%. So households are a bit different, but in terms of the number there, but and the household size went from 2.34 to 2.4. We get some of these numbers from the regional demographers at the Baltimore Metropolitan Council. But when we look at where the population's headed, I mean, I think folks who are worried about out of control, population growth should be comforted to know that there's little chance of that here. And it's just frankly based on the fact we're not able to accommodate that many people. And there's a lot more area in the county for that. So Baltimore Metropolitan Council has a very, very conservative estimate, 1.2%. That's this gray line on the graph.
But it's in.
Somebody should probably mute if they're.
Page popping out. English paper to.
I don't know who that is, but all right. The one on the bottom, share of the county. I'm going to go to the next slide and show you what that has looked like. But in terms of households, that would, if we tried to keep a kind of consistent percent of the county's population, that would lead us to the largest growth rate, 4.6. This is the average annual rate. So based on year by year, this is just a blow up of the, and we're really kind of looking at, we think middle of the road is probably more likely. We're not going to look at the highest. I think we're aiming for the middle here, between what's called the pipeline plus capacity. That's the development we already know is permitted and will bring a certain number of residents. Capacity, very little existing capacity. If you look at residential zoned properties in the city, in fact, the Cars Beach preservation essentially extinguished one of those properties that was slated to become a townhouse community. So 42 townhouses, I think. So, there's very few zoned, residential zone properties that that are going to expand. And so the trend 2000 to 2020, you could see that what that looks like if we continue that trend to 2040. That's what that auburn color line would look like. So lower left, you can see, this is our share of the county's population. 1990, we were 9.7% of the county. 2020, we're 7.6%. So it's going down, understandably. Based on our scenarios, we would still be kind of hovering between 7 and 7.6% of the county's population in any of those scenarios. And so we put together a forecast, which essentially says, well, based on those projections, how much housing is needed to meet that household projection? What type of housing should that be? And it should follow the goals of the comprehensive plan, which are essentially provide more opportunities for middle income households, workforce housing. So when we say new affordable housing, we should probably clarify that. We're talking about that 80 to 120% of the area median income, so-called missing middle demographic, that where we would look to add housing units for that population. And that would get us to our forecasted planned housing. There's a photo that we still need to add of mixed use infill housing, which I'm going to talk about. People are then wondering, well, where is that housing going to go? And that's what I'm going to get to. You could see in the text here, about 44% would be accommodated by mixed use, infill, and redevelopment. And that's going to be part of this discussion. So this is actually just I forgot the slide has, it's easier to read, but it says the same thing. This is what we know as under construction, pending permits as of 2020. Not much has changed really, and we have very little remaining infill capacity, which is, we don't know when that would happen, but there's not much, in terms of our existing available land to develop for housing. So I'm just going to show you kind of how the goals and recommendations lay out in our municipal growth chapter. Grow in a way that assures public facilities and infrastructure remain adequately sized and equipped to deliver exceptional service to existing residents, institutions, and businesses. Sort of goes without saying, but we really want to emphasize that we're focused on being responsible in how we grow. And I'm not going to go through all the actions, but you can read them. And promote exceptional development within the designated growth area that addresses the city's planning goals, and in particular contributes to the creation of good paying jobs and the fiscal strength of the city. So, this is what I was saying about if we are going to annex any properties, they have to be a good deal for the city financially. And we have some actions in here that relate to other goals, environmental goals that these properties could address as well. So it's not just about dollars and cents in terms of revenue, but it's the often the unseen benefits that those properties will offer environmentally. Growth in the number of households will prioritize increasing workforce and affordable housing. This is just a huge theme in this comprehensive plan. And I've said it in other contexts, in the last few months around workforce housing legislation, but our 2009 comprehensive plan was extremely clear about this need then. 2009, over a decade ago, it was already a huge need. It's already only gotten worse. So in some ways, we're kind of just advancing that because it's one of those topics that really just hasn't been addressed adequately. We fixed a loophole in our moderately priced dwelling unit ordinance, which is great, but it's proven to still not be enough to really make a dent in the need for workforce housing. Look at 3.4 here, remove barriers in the zoning code to creating additional workforce housing options, such as duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes in places where they are compatible with adjacent communities. We do want to unlock some of what I think is possible in the city that won't really diminish the character that we have today. Finally, prioritize revitalization and redevelopment that best connects residents to retail services and amenities. And this really gets at mixed use and the idea of putting compatible uses closer together so that people don't have to get in a car, drive to a basic convenience. They have things close to home. They can walk, ride a bike to get there. It has so many benefits to the city to do that. So we can't get to those goals without understanding how we're going to better utilize our land. Future land use map is the sort of foundational exhibit of the comprehensive plan. It's something that really tells us how we want to use our land resources in the city. I mean, it's sort of the ultimate way that as a city, our elected officials can kind of influence what happens here and how we can address our goals. Sort of starts with this future land use map. And I want to highlight a few of the key differences between the one we had in 2009 and the one we have today that would be our future land use map in the update. The first thing you'll probably notice is this bright green. We brought a lot of land kind of out of the margins, out of the shadows of the city. It was part of other properties that were coded as residential or commercial or industrial or institutional. We wanted to be much more deliberate and intentional about these environmental assets, natural resources in the city that have benefits that, particularly when there's a development being reviewed, we could sort of say, well, hey, there's adjacent lands here that are of value to the city. Maybe they will help with stormwater management, tree canopy, habitat, biodiversity, and water access, et cetera. We want to be deliberate about finding a way to protect those lands if they're not already, connect them to other conserved lands. And so it kind of starts by having them be visible on this future land use map. So we created this environmental enhancement designation. I want to give credit to the folks who are on our Forest Drive task force. This was an idea that came out of that. We took it to another level with it. Recreational enhancement are areas in dark green that are essentially our existing park system, but also we have some areas at the edges of schools where we want to see you know, shared amenities. You know, when school's not in session, it becomes a recreational amenity. That then kind of fills out kind of a large portion of the city that was not really recognized before. Mixed use is the other big change, where we are grouping all of our commercial land use parcels from 2009 and the mixed use into one mixed use land use designation. It expands the number of places where there's that flexibility to have compatible uses closer to each other. Most of these are places where you would expect, you know, today commercial or office development to happen, but in some cases, we've, like you can see, the Eastport Terrace Harbor House communities, where we're doing a master planning project right now, and the Watergate, now called Nautilus Point. The idea with these is, you know, the mixed use aspect may be minimal, you know, in terms of non-residential type uses, but the idea of bringing other uses that would benefit the people and live in those communities would have a lot of value. Admiral Farragut Apartments on Hilltop, another example, where like the non-residential use may be just 10%, you know. For, you know, the Eastport housing, Eastport Terrace Harbor House redevelopment, we're talking about early child care center, small amount of retail, recreational amenities, and things that would complement the residents of that location. And so we need to refine the mixed use and really kind of break it up into other categories. And we were initially planning to do that within this comp plan. We kind of pulled back a bit because inevitably we're going to be doing a zoning update, and that's where I feel like that definition will happen. I'm going to share in a bit what that might look like, but
the overall goal there would be to reduce friction for some smaller amount of non-residential use without having to go through, you know, some really heavy process that's either a special exception or, you know, some other code change where you just would reduce the friction to do that.
that's right.
That's the idea.
I'm not going to spend any time on this. It's just kind of distills those land use categories and kind of the vision for each of them. You can see for residential, we do want to diversify our housing stock and expand it, and meaning where are the places where we can expand residential options that won't detract from, you know, the character people already appreciate in Annapolis. So, you know, the environmental and recreation enhancement areas I mentioned before, that the most visible outcome of that in the comprehensive plan is this greenway map that is featured in several different chapters because it has relevance to land use, recreation, community facilities, transportation, environmental sustainability. It's a way of formalizing all of those places as potential easement areas that could form a greenway network for the city in combination with our bikeway system, which is shown in kind of the green line work, both our existing and planned bikeway improvements. So this is something that needs to get fleshed out further. It was initiated by the Annapolis Conservancy Board, who surveyed a lot of people to kind of come up with these priority sites. We do have a database of all of these sites that will be in the appendix of the comprehensive plan, showing their size and value. Kind of just another word about mixed use. It's, you know, we put emphasis on it because it is really the most efficient way to use the limited land resources that we have. You know, it operates on a understanding that with the ability to put these compatible uses together, you can minimize the footprint of the development, therefore making available other space for stormwater management, public realm improvements, et cetera, things that could really enhance the streetscape environment, the city, and we have a ton of great examples of mixed use in the city, but I almost feel like they've happened in spite of us not really being very forward thinking about it. They're just they're serving a market that's there, that's wanting mixed use, but not necessarily well positioned in our development code today. We've been talking about mixed use, expanding mixed use for decades. You can go back to comprehensive plans going back to the 90s, 80s maybe, different format variations. So ultimately, to realize mixed use, it's going to be through changes to our zoning code, but it kind of starts by articulating it through the future land use map. And this is just a few examples of what we mean by mixed use in Annapolis today, ranging from the modest building in Eastport where Bakers and Company is located, has a couple different uses in addition to the bakery, to the higher density building at the corner of Chinkopin and West Street that has a variety of retail and rental apartments. We've been doing mixed use in Annapolis for a very long time. I mean, downtown and Eastport are two of the best examples of how successful that can be, how desirable it is. It's you have people in parts of the city that don't have that and they want that. And we're kind of West Annapolis is kind of the growing place for mixed use today. But the
I
box,
think one of the things that's really evident here, but and I don't know, maybe you say it in the text someplace, but the thing that's really evident to me here is that the mixed use scale is small.
Mhm.
So it's not,
Right.
it's not build a, do what's something that Smart Growth America would produce, something very large scale with a Wegmans, like that sort of thing. This is all more very small retail with, 2,000 square feet, 1,000 square feet, things that are more likely to not necessarily are more likely to attract local businesses versus chains. Perhaps the Starbucks is an outlier, but that kind of thing. So if you don't say anything explicitly in the text, you might want to, if the intention is to sort of drive it towards small scale, to explicitly say that, because how you eventually want to write code to do that, code that you eventually write to do that has to take that into account, and to have some guidance there certainly would help if that's the intent.
That's a very good point. Yeah, I mean, that's the reality. A lot of this is very piecemeal, small scale stuff, but it's has huge value. And I've shared.
I think that's what people, while everybody wants a Wegmans around, I think what people really want close is smaller scale mixed use, because they would find, a Wegmans in their neighborhood overwhelming.
Yeah.
Not that there's a place for that. That's an absurd example, but you know what I mean.
Well, the box on this map is just highlighting that is technically the one location where we have a mixed use zoning district, but many of our other zones technically allow for it. It's just not, it's sort of embedded in the code. It's not necessarily that clear to somebody who's looking to develop a business zone property that they can, they can do residential over retail in many of our business zones, but it's, we could be a lot more proactive in encouraging it. So this is what, the West Annapolis master plan that was completed in 21 looked at essentially establishing mixed-use zones to replace the zoning districts today, which is kind of a more bizarre puzzle of different zones that don't necessarily relate to the actual fabric of the neighborhood and the driving sort of geographic features here. So, I mean, having a well-established neighborhood to the north is an important asset, and then Route Boulevard coming through as a gateway to the city is an asset and a defining feature. And so the zones here, or the mixed use categories, end up relating to the context in a way that I think is very applicable to other parts of the city, where we want different types of character and experience and, you know, sensitivity to existing context. And what we're providing, I think this is kind of speaks to something that's consistent with the comprehensive plan. That question about, is this project consistent with the comprehensive plan? We came up with these categories that we felt, you know, they're very much the vision for why we want more mixed use, because we can achieve a variety of benefits to the city. And it kind of comes down to these 6 categories. And so this is something that I think will help to measure the performance of projects, you know, in terms of how well they're going to actually benefit the city and achieve our goals. And, you know, I think this Severn Bank building is something that you could say, you know, maybe the mixed use aspect of it is minimal, but it is addressing a whole variety of these goals. Now, the scale of it is not something that we're going to see very often in Annapolis, but it really fits in well to the fabric of the city, and I think improved the location where it sits. Ultimately, that's kind of what we're looking for. We're also kind of acknowledging that there are a number of large infill sites in the city. And I should have mentioned this earlier in talking about mixed use. It's not just about mixed use, but it's about infill redevelopment being really the place where any future housing is going to happen. It's going to be in sort of acknowledging that there are properties in the city that are aging and not serving the city well, or the residents that live in some of these locations, and could be dramatically improved. And while the comprehensive plan is not going to provide designs for these sites, we're planning to provide considerations, opportunities that should be part of any thinking about redevelopment on these large infill sites. I mean, it's something that we grappled with. We actually did some site studies for a few of these with a consultant, and thinking about how far we wanted to go, how much guidance we wanted to provide in the comprehensive plan for some of these sites, particularly this former public works facility on Spa Road, which is the one that's city owned. You know, how much do we, and we ended up kind of pulling back here and saying, well, there are some very, very important context considerations that we can emphasize, but ultimately the design should be left to, you know, the process of design, you know, that there's a separate process from, you know, moving any of these sites forward. We want to emphasize the goals that are in this comprehensive plan, how they can play out on these sites. But we wanted to be mindful that that's where, you know, some of the more dynamic and transformative projects might happen in the next 10 to 20 years.
Those were those sort of case studies you showed maybe
Yeah,
the
yeah.
last time, but in
They're
terms of-
calling them case studies, yeah.
Hey, Eric, I have a question. I didn't see like the Growl Shopping Center in West Annapolis. Isn't that one of those
Yeah,
infill site?
it's here, and actually,
Oh, it is. Okay.
yeah, we should, some of this West Annapolis actually probably should not be in red. I think some of this is actually parcels that have already been redeveloped, but But certainly, I think the Grouse Shopping Center is the primary one that we will be showing for West.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
What do you mean by Robinwood?
Well, that's already the housing authority, it's, they're moving through their properties in terms of rehabilitating them. And that's really the next one in line after Eastport Terrace Harbor House. I mean, they're already working on the Morris Blum senior housing at the same time.
And Newtown 20 is almost done, or
It's
should be
done.
done.
It
It is done.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
yeah, by including Robinwood here, we're simply saying that
It's an opportunity.
when we start talking about what improved housing would look like on that site, there are some considerations for how it relates to its surrounding. I mean, with most of these sites, I think we want to undo some of the decisions that were made in the past about, like one way in, one way out, the lack of connection to surrounding context. With Robinwood, you have a vacant site across the street, the Eastport Shopping Center. You have a tire center and a vacant lot next to that have also been trying to find redevelopment partners. And I think there's something at that intersection that could be transformative, both for the residents and kind of broader community. So that's kind of the interest there.
That corner, though, is not currently zoned as mixed use, is it?
No, it's
Eric, how quickly can we get moving on this?
zoning.
Yeah, I mean, this mixed use stuff, this needs to get into place soon.
We do need to move on it. I started a project with a consultant that we kind of had to put on hold because we really need to get this comp plan done realistically before we can advance the zoning. But we've made a big budget request to sort of advance that. We also didn't have enough money in the budget to really do it the right way. So I agree, it can't happen soon enough, but
Right, and it's the mixed zoning out of and all of the other issues that are in the zoning code. That's the one that needs to get done, and that's the one that needs to be linked up with form-based.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We all know that, right?
yep.
Sorry.
Residential land use, I think this is kind of an important story to tell here. Residential is the largest land use type in the city, and a shocking amount of it does not allow anything more than a single family home. So that's something we're grappling with. I think that's kind of the challenge to expanding diversity, inclusion in the city, is figuring a way to open up some of these areas in a way that does not detract from the environment that people have today, that they appreciate. There are many ways to do that. I know that we can create more housing in many of these locations that would not fundamentally change what's there today. When we passed an accessory dwelling unit ordinance last year that allows for another housing unit to be built on any residential property in the city, that was a major achievement that a lot of communities would like to do, and we still haven't seen much come of it because there are still challenges to building ADUs. So very few pieces of legislation are going to be the quick fix or really create a lot of new housing right at once. I mean, it's everything is going to be moving very incrementally, and I think
one thing I think you could do on both of these charts, I think would really provide some context, because we all know that there are, for example, duplexes in these yellow areas that are non-conforming.
Yeah.
I know of two in West Annapolis, and they're all over the place, and I think the fact that you can't build them anymore is, I mean, personally, I think that's too bad. And the fact that they already exist sort of goes to the point of it's not going to destroy what's already there because they're already there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one of the things I think you could do on these charts is you could add a little red dot, especially on the left one. You could add a little red dot for every place there's one that's not allowed. Just to highlight the fact that, you know, it's not like this is a suburban tract in Montgomery County that none of that exists. I mean, this stuff exists, and I think it's important to highlight that because it gets to this fear of, oh my God, this is something that's really orthogonal to, you know, what the zoning says, but in fact, they're already there. So I think that's important to highlight.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think I'm gonna share something in a second that's gonna touch on that. We looked at permits issued, not necessarily final, meaning some of these may have not been fully built yet, but between 2010 and 2022, Casey Ortiz pulled these together in an apartment, and you know, it's very telling. You know, so SFD is single family dwelling, MFD is multifamily dwelling. You can see how significantly imbalanced those two are, and of the 173 multifamily dwelling units that were issued in the last 12 years, 145 were essentially equivalent replacement units. Many in our public housing communities at Newtown and Oberry Court along Clay Street. So building more than a single family, building even a duplex or a triplex remains very challenging in this city. This Town Court Apartments off of West Street is one of the few examples of something that did get built. It happens to be workforce housing. It's near the old Capitol Gazette building.
So is that a Beamer Park there?
It is.
Yeah, that's
Any-
okay. That's interesting.
could be staff, you know. But yeah, so yeah, this is just another very telling pattern of kind of how the city has evolved since our last comprehensive plan, which brings us to the much talked about missing middle housing, and this graphic, which is everywhere. We are going to use it in the comprehensive plan because it's very effective at showing the kinds of buildings that make up missing middle housing, many of which are not allowed in Annapolis today. I want to just kind of zero in on these few down at this end of the spectrum. Duplexes, I mean, I could have added fourplexes too, but really just the simple duplex is something that you think of Annapolis urban fabric. I think of duplexes. I think many people would think of duplexes. Something you see in almost every neighborhood of the city. You would be shocked at how many of these are not allowed in our current zoning code. It's unfortunate. I mean, it's the fabric of the city that many people appreciate. And over time, attitudes changed, and I think they've changed again. And I think there's a lot of desire for this type of housing, if not 3 units or 4 units on the same site. But this one in the bottom right actually is 3 units on Franklin Street. Few of these are, this one in the lower left is triplex, but I want to, give a shout out to, a social media account called Annapolis Missing Middle that is trying to promote a lot of these types of housing and make people aware of how much of this is in Annapolis today. There is a growing constituency of people who value this type of housing and are asking why we don't have more of it. So I think this is a very straightforward goal to achieve.
It would be a good game to try to guess which ones are in Annapolis.
Yeah. It's
Because
true.
many of them are.
No, they all are in Annapolis. And
They
I think-
all are?
They're
Yeah.
all in Annapolis.
Oh, yeah, I think I
They're-
could name just about every one.
Really?
This one, this one here is in the historic district, would not be allowed. It's not conforming. So, yeah, it's just,
Yeah, I mean, what I suggested
These
was basically
change-
taking this information and putting these dots on that prior map.
Yeah.
You have the data already.
well, I just want to close this section by talking parking briefly. You know, it's not something we identify on our future land use map, but I do want to say we've spent some time mapping off-street parking in the city. You can see it here in the black areas on the map. We've mapped where city managed off-street parking is, that other public parking managed by private entities. This is also a pretty fundamental aspect of the comprehensive plan. I mean, that in regard to land use, and this is also covered in the transportation chapter, but this comprehensive plan is encouraging the city to revise our parking requirements, to make better use of that land, and not mandate parking requirements that are beyond what might be sensible today. So I'm just going to leave it at that, but it is well discussed in the comprehensive plan. And I kind of want to move ahead. I know I've been talking a long time already. It's really tough to talk about this content in any kind of simple way, but a general way. But you can start, if you look through these goals, you can kind of see the tenor of what we're talking about. In fact, that issue of parking comes up in this L 2.4, study and propose reductions to the city's parking requirements for all land uses to incentivize the sensible development of underutilized land, reduce impervious coverage, improve stormwater management performance, and encourage walking, biking, and transit use, among other benefits to the city. As you can tell, we still have some wordiness to cut back on here, but that's under this reinvestment in vacant underutilized parcels. I think we all could probably think of a parking lot that's underutilized. There's a lot here about adjusting zoning language related to housing. We get into support, revitalization for businesses and private sector employment. I think some people might say, well, we're kind of out of the pandemic, but there are long-term impacts that I think restaurants in particular are still dealing with. Changes in workforce behavior and where people locate for their work. I think that has had ripple effects on the city as well. We certainly want to acknowledge that the historic district has different challenges and needs. So those are addressed here. And then finally, this issue, this opportunity with our greenways is something that we want to be very forward about, and how they play into the kind of development of the city, being much more intentional about how we link our natural resources of the city.
Is there anything on the prior chart and in this historic district, was there anything that talked about the issue of investment STRs?
That is actually an area that we're still trying to finesse. I think where I envision the action to be is that we do want it to be a use. Currently it's not a use in our zoning code for whatever reason. It is a commercial use. We want to be clear about that. We want to find, I've actually had several conversations with Alderwoman Tierney about this. There is a need to balance neighborhood preservation with short-term rentals. And, the city, I will say, has a pretty good we have a setup for monitoring them, but I think we don't have much policy in place for sort of where they should occur if we want to do that. But I think it's going to be much more about encouraging, finding that there's value in having short-term rentals owned by local residents and not, out of town owners. And that, I think that's somewhere where we're probably going to land as well. We certainly want investment in the city, but that seems to be a place where we have some consensus. We want property owners who live here in the city to have that opportunity for revenue, and it's an aspect of our tourism economy for sure. What we don't want is for a lot of our housing to be bought and immediately put into short-term rentals and not made available to people who could potentially live here and be workforce in the city. And that's really the issue, I think. So finding that balance.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see how that shakes out, because certainly I think it needs to be better balanced than it is now, for sure. Certainly in the historic.
Yeah, and the legislation right now doesn't even say that you have to be an owner of the property to be a short-term rental your property. It just says a resident. I think that language needs to be fixed.
That's a good
I
point.
just, someone pointed that out and I looked it up and I thought, holy cow, how did we let that loophole go?
Yeah.
So maybe I'll just send you an email just to point out that it's it says resident, not owner.
Yeah, I'll look for that.
Okay.
We're at the final stage of this presentation. Thanks for your patience. This is where it gets pretty interesting and challenging. We have the future land use map on the left, which actually the light green, I think we're a little bit different, slightly colored difference between the one you saw earlier, but it's the same map. The environmental enhancement areas are not this bright green, but they're there. And the current zoning map is on the right. And you can see it's, they don't exactly reflect one another. I mean, that's really, I think, what we want to ultimately do is get to a place where our zoning map is a true reflection of our future land use vision. And, over time, we have created a number of zoning districts to achieve very specific goals. We have 31 districts today for a city that's 8 square miles. So it adds a level of complexity that makes it very challenging to invest in the city. And I think that's something that's a benefit to improving it. I'm a member of the American Planning Association. I have a planning license through that organization. I was pleased to see this planning guide come out about a month ago. It kind of speaks to the fact that municipalities all over the country are grappling with zoning codes that are outdated and don't really enable municipalities to achieve their goals, and in many cases are shutting out residents from living in these cities, and they're just not equitable. And this guide is all about it. They even used a background image that looks like something out of our zoning code in terms of the way the lands are broken up into these very, very specific zones. And so, I just want to say, when you look at our zoning map, I think it's hard to discern a relationship between the zones and land uses that are, desired here. You can almost sense the politics that are at play here, and the way that the zoning districts have sort of carved around certain properties over time. And, part of equity in zoning is ensuring that you have a diversity in people who are participating in the zoning process. So that's going to be something we'll be mindful of when we do a rezoning. And you want to create zoning districts that are accessible to people. So the idea that workforce housing should only be in this part of the city and not this part of the city. I mean, that is kind of inequity in a nutshell. So we can do better. We also have these studies over the last 15 years that my colleague Teresa Wellman, our Chief of Community Development, has managed. We're required to do these analysis of impediments to fair housing regularly. Every single one has told us that we're not compliant with the Fair Housing Act, HUD's Fair Housing Act, and it's primarily because of our zoning code being very limiting. So it's all kind of been documented, really. It's not like a secret that we need some change in our zoning and find a way to unlock more of the housing options that are already available. I want to just close with an example that I think it's not necessarily a city that is identical to Annapolis. This is South Bend, Indiana, where Mayor Pete, our U.S. Transportation Secretary, was the mayor. As and they did a transformative rezoning that really transitioned into a zoning code that's based more about urban neighborhood context rather than uses. That's really the big idea with form-based zoning that I'll talk about in a second. And you could see the difference in the zoning map. It seems a little more sensible to me. And there's types of zoning districts on the right based on place. This is a spread that we're filling out in the comprehensive plan. It goes back to kind of, this is what we were looking at with West Annapolis, these kinds of context-based zoning districts. On the right, you can see the spectrum of how much residential versus non-residential. So the Village Main Street would be Annapolis Street going through the neighborhood there. 80% is non-residential. I mean, this is a place for retail. 20% would be residential. And we kind of did this as part of the planning effort. This is kind of the idea with these districts. They're mixed use. They're all mixed use, but have different varieties, different breakdowns of uses. This is I think, an effective way of explaining the difference in the zoning that we have today with the form-based zoning that we would be looking to implement. Is that our current zoning is heavily based on the uses. What uses are allowed? We do have form guidelines to some degree. We have setbacks, we have height limits, floor area ratios in a couple cases, but we don't have anywhere near the kind of guidance that a form-based code would provide in terms of actually being able to be more predictive in what that future development would look like. So this definition kind of summarizes it. And the form-based code would really, I think, give us as a community more confidence in what's going to come. And I have full confidence in my colleagues who deal with new development, but it just seems that when new projects come in, the developer is at one end of the spectrum and the community is at the other, and we're kind of constantly trying to get closer and closer. And I think the form-based code would help us in that regard and simplify the process a bit. This is another way to think about it. Euclidean zoning has no connection to Euclid, the mathematician. It actually relates to a Supreme Court case in Euclid, Ohio, that challenged early zoning. But today, the emphasis is on use and density, and form, you can see, is what the building looks like. Even though ultimately we end up with good form, that gets kind of worked through quite a bit to get to an end result. Whereas with form-based code, you kind of start with guidelines that help their guidance that the community has already supported, and helps to move the project along more expeditiously with support. And you can kind of balance those things depending on, what part of the city you're talking about. This is just kind of a simple animation that kind of shows how this would play out. You start with your build to line, then how much of that site laterally are you going to take up? Then you kind of have transparency, the window, the glazing, how porous you want these buildings. You have minimum stories, maximum stories. And ultimately, the goal is to create, a nice streetscape environment. This is kind of not everywhere in Annapolis, to be sure, but this is the basic idea. And so this kind of summarizes, why we think a form-based code is appropriate here in Annapolis. It will achieve all of these goals. We want more walkable city, places that we can get without a car. It will do that for us. High quality public realm, more predictable framework for new development, economic development opportunities, housing choices and affordability. Climate change can be done through form-based code by being much more clear about where, projects already have to meet the state stormwater guidelines, but we don't provide guidance on where those stormwater features would be best situated to perhaps have public benefit. So we could be more clear about that. Context-sensitive urban design. And then ultimately, we do want to try to have fewer zoning districts in the city that could kind of be much more straightforward. So ultimately, in a form-based code, you have these four, at minimum, you have these four components. And I'm going to share an example of what that'll look like in a moment. I just want to say that historically, zoning changes in a city have happened through small area plans that follow a comprehensive plan. So typically, and we do these small area sector studies, and usually there's been zoning recommendations. It's very challenging to make hard and fast zoning recommendations in a comprehensive plan because, as you can see, we're so like 30,000 feet. We make recommendations that are about the achieving our goals, but the specificity is not there. So we then look at these small area sector studies to find that specificity. And this one on the left from Forest Drive in 1989, the Ward 1 sector study 1993, this Outer West Street, call it Upper West Street today, but this was from 2004, and that really created the business corridor enhancement zoning area along Chinkapin and Upper West Street. And lately, we have not had a good track record of adopting these sector studies. So I think that's something we want to improve on. Alderwoman O'Neill has said she supports this West Annapolis master plan, and I think we can get that one adopted. But I think we've probably missed the window on these other two. We might be able to get the Upper West Street sector study adopted, but that was 2016, and so we're kind of closed. The window's closing on that. But we want to be much more deliberate about our sector studies in the future. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but a signature idea in the comprehensive plan is to shift from strictly a neighborhood focus to one that's more watershed based. And it may be odd to sort of think about, Spa Creek as something that has impacts to both downtown and Eastport, since the neighborhood identities are so different. But there's value in thinking about small areas in Annapolis along creek sheds, given that every land use decision has impacts on our waterways, which is ultimately the reason why Annapolis is here, why people come to visit in large numbers, why the U.S. Naval Academy is here. I mean, it's on and on. We need to have clean and well-managed waterways. And I think, we certainly have lots of regulations already that are aimed at that, a critical area, for example. But I think many of our local thinking about planning could be much more tied to creek sheds. And I was inspired a bit by this. On the left is a graphic from Ellicott City's urban watershed master plan that was completed a couple of years ago. And I think it's a great precedent for what we're thinking about with these creek shed plans that could really help to kind of form development decisions around the city's creek shed context. Now, obviously, Ellicott City did their planning after devastating floods, and that was kind of that's what kind of told them we need to be planning differently here. I think there's lots of signs for why that might make sense in Annapolis too. So lastly, an example of form-based code from South Bend, Indiana, that I think is remarkable in its simplicity, but still conveys an enormous amount of information just clearly. These are actual pages from their city code, their zoning code. And I just wanted to highlight this one zone, neighborhood center. You can see, it describes the type of characteristics, type of housing units or building types, I should say. On the first page, they do have a use table, similar to ours. It just happens to be organized into these categories. You can see how they also have allowed, subject to standards, essentially special exception, similar to Annapolis, but it's all very clearly articulated. They have more of a breakdown in housing types in this residential category.
Do you find this list of uses just at broad brush to be coarser than what we have?
You said coarser?
Coarser, less fine, so the categories are more more inclusive, or?
I haven't really scrutinized it, to be honest. I think this is one area where this is actually not the part of this that I'm most interested in, but yeah, it does seem like when they updated their zoning code, they took a look at what are the uses that are relevant today. And we certainly could benefit from that. We have a lot of uses that are, I would say, from a different age and not as relevant anymore. They then go into building placement, which is, we do have quite a lot of this already in our guidelines. It's just not kind of graphically described in this way. And access and parking is pretty specific to where parking. This is keep in mind, this is kind of like an Annapolis street context. This is a neighborhood center type use, so zoning district. So that's kind of what's guiding a lot of this. But then, they go into urban building form, building components, in much greater detail than what we have today. Building standards. So you could see the ground floor, with transparency. Glass is sort of a way of having an active ground level building. Even if what's happening inside is not a shop, it might be an office, but it's still something that makes for a better streetscape. They get into building materials generally, and everything is kind of cross-referenced with other material in the code. And then finally, landscape design and signage is, I just think it's like remarkable that in this amount of space, they're able to kind of distill everything. And then when they talk about residential, I thought it was really interesting to see that, they have a suburban neighborhood type zoning district that, could be certain neighborhoods in Annapolis. They do allow a duplex in this relatively low density neighborhood. zone. But many other things are still very suburban in nature. Then you kind of go to the urban neighborhood one, which still looks like many neighborhoods in Annapolis, but you kind of get into a little bit more flexibility. The building types are kind of similar, but you're on tighter lots. And then you kind of go to urban neighborhood 2, you have a lot more flexibility in terms of housing types, but you still have the goal being the sort of basic building unit that looks very much like a single family home. It just could accommodate, a few more housing units, dwelling units inside. And I think that's kind of ultimately a big point that we're going to have to make in the future as we address our zoning. How there are very straightforward ways of retaining the character that people want, while also unlocking, flexibility, for housing options and mixed use. And I think we can do that. I think I'm kind of looking forward to having a more robust conversation about that. And that's the presentation for tonight. So it's a lot, but I really just wanted to kind of give you as much as we have right now for a comprehensive plan, and hoping that this presentation can be watched by others to kind of see where we're at with the comprehensive plan, and provide some context. So hopefully it gives some people some peace of mind that we're thinking about.
Yeah, well, just thank you for taking the time to put that all together. And, I'm getting really good feelings about how this is shaping up, and looking forward to seeing the rest of it. I've certainly asked a lot of questions and made comments along the way. But if other commissioners want to chime in and ask any questions or make comments, please go ahead.
Eric, this is the most visionary plan I've seen of the two or three that I've seen. I mean, I really get a sense of vision here. I really get a sense of having, looked at the last 2 or 3 plans and all of the stuff that's been going on here for 30 years, and really looking ahead. And I think that it's, I think that you're looking, exposing the things that need to be done, and pointing them out, and doing a pretty good job of communicating all of this. You'll have to put it together for a road show,
Yeah.
You're going to be doing it like, 20.
Yeah, no, I definitely need to figure out a way to distill these concepts. And I threw a lot into this.
I think I would shorten up on form-based codes and just give it a couple of 1-2 punches, and make it attractive. You follow me?
Yeah.
Don't get down in the weeds of suburban 1 and urban 3, and that's not what people need. What they need is the reassurance that this is how you actually retain community character. But anyway, I'm grateful that this is getting to this point. Can we get it done, please?
Yeah.
We need to move on. We need to get this zoning done. We're losing opportunity.
I was going to say, I think by having this, and it sounds like it's imminent, we'll be able to get moving on some of the legislation. I agree with Bob that, obviously you're working on it and doing a great job, but I'm excited about the fact that once it's in place, you're right. It's not going to be, the answer. The legislation doesn't write itself, but we can point to the comprehensive plan and confidently say, this is the direction we're moving, and here's the background of why we're doing this. And especially those pictures of the missing middle, when you show what we have in Annapolis right now, visually, it's so compelling that, this is what we have. This is the neighborhoods we love, but we can't build this way right now. Those examples you just exhibited were wonderful. So I hope they show up somewhere in the plan.
Yeah, they will. They will. Yeah.
And I want to also applaud the work that was done on the Greenway plan and the connectivity of all of our green spaces and natural assets. I think that's wonderful. We've talked about it for so long, but this is really the first time it's been put together like this. So I'm really excited about all of this and trying to help present it to especially my neighborhood. But however we can help, I'm on board.
Thanks.
Eric, I share Bob's and Diane's optimism. I think what may be missing, at least for me, to remove a little bit of the skepticism, is just the implementation aspect of this. So if we look at the intention of previous comprehensive plans, or even the intention of changes to legislations like with the ADUs and so on, and then you reflect back on in the last 18 months or 2 years since that was implemented, how many applications have actually come through, how many have actually been realized. And I think there's a gap here, not necessarily in this time, but just in general, of intention, and then the legislation or the rules are changed and then it doesn't materialize. So what is in this plan is different from previous iterations or previous attempts to change and address those issues that may not be realized going forward. I think something to address that aspect of it would be nice to see going forward.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Do you want any kind of community feedback tonight? There are people who are listening, probably not many, but would this be an appropriate time for you to hear some questions and observations?
I'm open to it. There are people in the wings, so to speak. I mean, I'm fine with that. If you all are, okay to hang out.
I would actually object because we didn't publicize this as a public hearing.
That's a good point. That's a good
I'm
point.
reluctant to open up to discussion or public hearing outside of the presentation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's-
I agree. I think if people are watching and they want to certainly submit comments through the web form, we'll get those and pass them along, and you can respond to them publicly, Eric. But I agree. We didn't advertise that we're going to take any input tonight, so we probably shouldn't do that tonight.
yeah.
But people certainly can submit questions and comments on the form, and they'll obviously get to Eric eventually, and you can respond to those.
Yeah. I mean, we put a lot of information out through this presentation. I'm sure people will watch this, and I would encourage people to reach out if they have questions or concerns. I'm not opposed to addressing them at this point. I mean, I'm excited to be able to share a full document soon, so people can kind of see it all together and make sense of it in a holistic way. Some of this is a little bit out of context, but if people have questions, by all means, and easy to reach through the city's website.
Great. Well, thanks for taking us along, and I really appreciate every time you've come to give us an update, and it's been good to see how it's morphed, and I think it's coming, as everybody said, it's very visionary, and it's really coming along well. So thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it. Look forward to coming back with more kind of shorter presentation.
All right. Well, it was nice to see that there's a schedule up front that I think is realistic, and we're going to do everything in our power to stick to that as you get the So I think the draft is the next thing we're looking for, and to set the date for public hearing, and let the comment period be open so we can all engage people in the community on that.
All right.
All right, well, thanks. Any final questions for Eric or comments? Okay. Well, thanks again. So the next item on the agenda is just any unfinished business, and I don't have anything, but for the good of the order, is any you have a comment, Eric? Oh, you left. Okay. Anybody else have anything for the good of the order to bring up tonight?
Why are Jakubiak and all these people here? Why were they here?
to support Eric, I
Support him?
assume.
Well, in case we had any questions that were more specific to their areas of the drafting, I'm assuming.
I think we should have allowed questions too.
Well, we'll have to advertise, we'll have to
Only
advertise. that we'll
policy,
take
it's
it.
only policy wonks who are watching it tonight.
Anyway, okay, well, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second, all in favor?